Okay, we should be going live now. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second ever Laterpress live stream. We are picking up from where we left off, working on a book written with AI assistance. I'm going to be walking folks through some of the AI tools that we have with Laterpress and how that can help as part of the process of writing a book with AI. These streams are intentionally long form in nature. I do not whip through the process as fast as I would if this was a tech demo or a tutorial video. We really sit with each step of the process longer to show what the AI generated. I give folks my thoughts about how I feel about the output. Where is it good? What do I not like about it? How would I change things? Because when working with AI, AI can think much faster than a human can. We can't compete with computers there. It can come up with a lot of text very, very quickly. So the reality of working with AI is that the vast majority of your time is actually not working with the AI itself. It is thinking through the information it gives you, formulating your response to it, editing the results. So rather than being flashy and, just kind of going bang, 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 clicking a lot of buttons, for these streams, I like to show the thought process on how I use things, why I do things the way I do them, and continuing there. Today, we're going to be focusing on plotting with AI. So we have our basic concept. We've given it some general notes and context on the universe. We are now, for the next hour, working on ironing out the plot of the book. So just to catch folks up on where we left things, I'm going to go into my notes here. Before ever touching AI, I had written down my basic concept for the series, which is, or not the series, the novel, which is it's an urban fantasy setting where two single people have been matched by Cupid, which is a fantasy dating app, and they meet up on a date. Their first date goes horrible, and now they are stuck in a 60-minute time loop, forced to replay an hour over and over and over again until they come to realize that the app is correct. They actually are a good match for each other. So my intent with the app is for it to kind of, play like it's an antagonist, play the villain, but its heart is ultimately in the correct place, and it did not screw these two up when it paired them. Our two characters they have a few things in common. They both have names that might seem odd or pretentious. Our female lead goes by Tessa. Her legal name is Bastet, after an Egyptian goddess, which she thinks is cultural appropriation because she's not Egyptian. Um, you know, she this is a setting where many pantheons, gods and goddesses are real entities, and they exist in culture as politicians, as celebrities. They're well, as company CEOs. They're very well known in society. So she thinks being named after one is ridiculous. Our male lead goes by Eddie. His legal name is Edgar, named after Edgar Allan Poe, who would also continue to exist in this fantasy universe. Both of them have jobs working with other people or beings. Tessa is a therapist for familiars, kind of helping them work out the emotional issues they have with dealing with their humans. And her job kind of gives her a habit of approaching everything with therapy speak and reading too many red flags into situations where they don't exist. Eddie is a consultant for the corporeally disadvantaged, aka the dead, and helps them resolve their regrets so that they can move on to the afterlife. And so dealing with the unhappy dead for a living kind of makes him freak out about his own mortality and worrying that he's going to have all of these regrets, isn't living life to the fullest, and that can kind of make him obsessive or clingy or come on too strong. So they both have different flaws that they need to overcome. So these were my initial notes here. And now over in Laterpress, I'm going to come back to the assistant in a minute. When I imported them, you can see here are the notes that as I imported them into the idea tab. And in our last stream, we generated character cards for the different characters and some lore entries to provide background on the universe and the rule of how things work. And we generated an initial outline. Now, between last week's stream and this week's stream, I did go into the first beat of the plot line and changed it to I had a more specific idea as to how I wanted the story to start. So I rewrote this initial beat to be a lot closer to how I want things to go. For the rest of, and I think I did that with the second one as well. I'm going to double check this. But then for the later beats, I left the content in here exactly how the AI generated it. But then in the end, as a note for myself, I wrote notes in capitals to show, okay, here's what I didn't like about the beat, and here's how we need to change things. Because I wanted to cut down on the amount of time spent on stream thinking about things, to kind of move things along faster so that I can show you, okay, here's what I thought about the beat, here's how we need to change things. So let's say we are at the state where the system, when it generates things, it's going to generate a plot outline based on all of the information that it's been given so far, which are these beat cards that we see here. And the plot outline is fitting with romantic comedy genre conventions. Now, the first thing I like to do once I have a plot outline, before doing any more work with it, would be to go up here to the assistant, which is where you can ask a question, give it a thought, and the AI can scan the information that exists in the book so far to answer your question or offer an opinion. So I did this off stream between sessions, but I'm going to show you what I did here. When I'm working on a plot, before I get too deep into the weeds, the first thing I like to have AI do is audit AI output. So I asked it, review the plot outline. Are there any weaknesses you can see with it that we should focus on improving? If so, describe what they are and why you feel they need improvement in as much detail as possible. Think like a developmental editor, be specific. Here I'm kind of defining how I want it to think, and I added be specific because I don't want it to give me generalities. I really want to try to have it give me as much detail as it can about why it thinks something needs to be changed. And, I may not necessarily agree with everything that the AI is going to say, but as I start the process of looking over a plot outline and seeing where do I like what it offered me, where do I want to change things, this is a way to quickly divert my attention to some specific areas and points of emphasis to potentially take care of some of the biggest issues very quickly before those compound in multiple chapters of text or scenes that are redundant or flat or don't serve my vision for where I want the story to go. So it started by giving me the general strengths. It likes the premise, it likes the supporting cast, it likes the structure. Okay, great. I'm less interested in AI flattery. I don't need to tell me if my ideas are any good. I want it more to tell me where things might not be so great. And it pointed out in time loop stories, there's always a risk of momentum stalling. Loops can start to feel repetitive, or like progress only happens because the plot requires it, not because the characters made spontaneous choices. That is a fair issue and something that we should be mindful of as we continue to iterate on the plot and work through things. It offered me some suggestions. It points out agency versus manipulation. Cupid, as written, straddles the line between a benevolent manipulator and a mild antagonist, which is the line I want it to walk. However, there are moments where Tessa, Eddie reclaim agency for themselves versus simply performing what Cupid wants could use sharper definition. Okay, I agree with this too. I think some of the issues it points out is how much detail do you feel you need at the outline level of writing versus at the scene level? Because as we work through drafting a book, the top level of organization is an outline. That is your high level overview of how the plot is going to flow throughout the book, and that's these beat cards that we're looking at here. The next level of organization down is scene cards, which is at a more chapter level. Here's what's going to happen moment to moment. So sometimes if you are asking the assistant to review an outline, it's going to point out issues where it's correct to flag an issue because it's not written down in explicit detail in the outline. And I don't know that it needs to be, but it is correct to be something to think about at the chapter level as you're working through scene cards to make sure that moments of agency, how are they taking care of those things at a chapter level, that does need to be made more clear. So that is a point I agree with as something to be thinking about as we work through things. It points out potential problems with Tessa's arc and her vulnerability, and Eddie's issues as well. I'm not going to read through all of these. It thinks the world building integration should be in there more. I agree with that too, but this is another one that I feel is 100% at the scene level, figuring out where to work that in versus trying to spell out all of those details from a rough outline. But that could be my personal style. You may feel differently with how you want to utilize the outline space. The AI was not happy that I mentioned that Aphrodite exists in this role, and the Cupid app at the heart of this whole plot is built by Aphrodite Incorporated. It felt that I need to have if I'm going to mention that Aphrodite is a character that exists, it thinks I need to have her more explicitly involved. I can see her maybe coming in for a cameo, but I don't want like the goddess of love dominating in the story. It wants more payoff for the supporting cast. And it gave me a summary of things to primarily focus on. And so then the follow-up question I asked it, please provide some suggestions for what could happen in different loops to address the shortcomings you identified. Remember that while many events in the time loop may be static, our characters have full agency to go off script and do whatever they want within the 60-minute window, so do not confine your thinking to the restaurant where they first meet. Now, when I'm prompting, so what I'm doing here is I prompted a follow-up question to say, okay, you gave me some advice. Now let's talk about how we can implement your advice. What do we do with it? But one tendency of AI models is to be very on the nose and direct with the information you give them. So it is your job to kind of direct its flow. My concern would be that if I don't tell it that it can go off script, break the rules, that it can do different things, that every suggested idea it gives me for what happens on a time loop, it will confine itself to the restaurant where the two of them first meet. And so I'm giving it explicit permission there to think wider and do more than that. And so it gave me some different ideas for loops that could happen. And by no means am I beholden to keeping any of these. Some of these I did not like at all. For example, I don't like the idea of a paparazzi loop where word gets out that the app is meddling and people come and start taking photos, whatever. One of the big conceits of this premise is that everybody who signs up for the app is magically bound to a non-disclosure agreement where they cannot say to anybody what their experience was with the app or what happened with the app. It keeps an air of mystique behind the matchmaking process and what goes on. So the idea that anybody catches wind or starts documenting the scene feels explicitly against the premise. So that would be one that I would reject. it follows up with that idea because it said it wanted Aphrodite to be more involved. So it creates an idea for a loop where she does specifically step in. And so, skipping through it gave me 8 different ideas for a potential loop in their dating experience for the plot as to what happens. I could now continue this thread to say, give me some more ideas, or here's what I'm thinking. We go this direction or that direction. Continue to have an iterative conversation with the assistant about what you're thinking about. Let its ideas stimulate your thinking about where you want to take things. Um, what I like about brainstorming with AI is that it kind of gets you through the process of weeding out the bad ideas much faster. So if you're trying to think about where to take a plot and you're, sitting there in your own head thinking through different scenarios, you can only think of different scenarios so fast, and then you're auditing, okay, but does that scenario make sense? Does that scenario make sense? Whereas if you're brainstorming with AI, it can give you a lot of ideas very quickly, and you can prune out all of the ones that are not going to work. And somebody could say, well, those suggestions are garbage. Why did I do this? Because every idea that you see that then doesn't work is also helping you get closer to, okay, here's what I want. Here's what good looks like. Now I'm understanding a clearer sense of my direction, my purpose, and what good looks like because I know what it's not. And so I find that process helpful. Plus, if the AI gives you an idea where you're like, okay, it gives you a couple ideas that aren't quite there, but there are elements of each that you like. You can say, well, okay, those specific ideas weren't there, but I could combine these, or they may inspire your own ideas to get you thinking, oh, that's not quite it, but what if I do something similar like this? And now you are off to the races with your own thoughts again, having your own ideas and coming up with things that you want, faster than if you're just sitting there in your own headspace trying to pull ideas from the ether. So that is how I find value in this kind of process here. So I'm going to close out the assistant momentarily, and we'll come back to that. But now I'm going to zoom in the editor a little bit to make these cards bigger and easier to read on stream. So our book starts with the ordinary life of our characters, before they meet, before hijinks start happening. This is largely edited by me with a little bit of the initial AI text. We open on 2 parallel meetings in Horizon, which is what I renamed the city. The AI took a punt on trying to come up with a name, and it called it Modern Mythic City, working title. And I was like, we're not going to do that. So I decided to rename it Horizon and give the AI a little more context that this is a high altitude mountainous terrain. And the reason the city is named Horizon is because with all the changes in elevation, many people live in areas where you just have a beautiful view for miles. You can see see as far as the eye can see, and that is why it's called Horizon. We have Tessa is in her cozy plant-filled office mid-session with an anxious Phoenix familiar who keeps stress molting umbers onto the couch. So that is an AI detail. I left that there. I thought that was amusing. I didn't edit it. But then I put in here, after the meeting, she checks, I need to fix that. She checks the Cupid app, only to see the words match pending, your patience is appreciated. Because there were some continuity errors in here where it has both of them already in the app, but for world building, I wanted to have Eddie signing up for the app to kind of use him as the character to establish how the process works, how somebody signs up, how somebody gets selected for it. So its initial idea was that they were both already on the app and matched, and so I changed things there. Across town, Eddie is in a cramped apartment, sitting across from the translucent ghost of an elderly woman who refuses to move on until someone finds the letters she wrote and never sent and delivers them to her surviving husband. So he, No, how she felt about him. There's another example that, I wrote this because I can't talk and type, and I left that mistake in there. Eddie takes his clients seriously and gives them his undivided attention. Later, he meets up with one of his friends who convinces him he needs to sign up for Cupid. Eddie balks at the cost, $5,000, and the intensive screening requirements, but his friend convinces him it's worth it. These are some changes because in the original draft, the text said that Eddie is having a conversation and juggling multiple contacts on his phone, and he's got all of this stuff going on. And to me, that felt very out of character and unprofessional. So I was like, yeah, let's not do that. I wanted to depict him as somebody who is caring for his clients. So I changed things up there. The next plot beat. In here, I changed things a lot. I think I started by modifying this. If you don't like the text that is AI generated in a beat, and you have specific generation or a specific idea for how you want things to change, you can click the edit button here, and modifying all beats will modify every single beat in the outline based on intent and information that you give it on how you want things to change. Or you can click modify to modify one specific beat. So I clicked that. Again, this is off stream before we started. I did save the prompt that I put in there. So what I told it was, this Eddie's portion of this beat should be dedicated to signing up for Cupid. This includes an exhaustive background check, personality profile, and an interview with an Aphrodite Inc. employee. The interview is where his insecurities start coming to light, but not in obvious telegraphed ways. So now back to where we are with the beat. So the modified beat, Eddie signs up for Cupid, a gauntlet that turns out to be far more grueling and revealing than he bargained for. Begins with the app's exhaustive background check, criminal records, financial history, social media archaeology, and a sweep of his professional licensing with the city's Afterlife Transition Services Board. Then comes the personality profile. Finally, he's connected with a video call with a warm, unhurried Aphrodite Inc. employee named Cleo, who conducts what is framed as a casual compatibility conversation, but functions unmistakably as an intake interview. So we've got all of these details about how, it's going from his perspective. Because at this point, he is mostly the character I wanted to focus on for here's how the app works, here's how this whole process begins, to kind of establish the rules of the app and what our characters are getting into and why anybody would use this or want to go on a date that underpins the rest of the novel. Then we cut back to Tessa. The next day, Tessa gets a notification of a match on Cupid, views Eddie's details, and begins immediately cataloging concerns. Artemis, her familiar, tells her that she's already writing a breakup speech for a man she hasn't met. Tessa bristles, but we see the wound beneath the armor. A quick flashback montage of promising dates she ended after one or two meetings, each time convinced she'd spotted a fatal flaw, each time Artemis sighing. So that can work at the scene level. I would let this stand as is on the outline level, but when it comes time to generate scene cards for how that is specifically written, I would be paying very, very close attention to what the AI wants to say about how it's going to approach that, because I want to make sure that it's kind of punchy, that it keeps moving, that there's a little bit of humor in there, and that it doesn't turn its attention too inward or feel like, melodramatic, purple prose, navel gazing, anything like that. So I think that works as a summary, but with the way AI writes things, you want to pay attention to that. So those two I had edited up before the stream starts. Now we get into new territory where I haven't touched anything yet. I just started leaving myself notes on here's what it provided me, and now we need to start thinking about how we want to take things in a different direction, impose more of our own will on the flow of the story taking the information that it gave us as a starting point. So we're at the meet cute or the meet disaster. It's very much a disaster for these two going on from the start. It came up with Tessa and Eddie meet at a trendy restaurant in the city's charm-regulated nightlife district where ambient enchantments are supposed to keep the mood relaxed. It goes wrong almost immediately. Eddie arrives 15 minutes early and has already reorganized the table setting, ordered a conversation starter appetizer, and prepared an opening monologue about how he believes being radically honest about intentions. She responds with careful clinical deflections, which Eddie interprets as cold rejection. Artemis, who insisted on coming and is perched on the back of Tessa's chair, mutters loud enough for both of them to hear. This is already disaster and the bread hasn't arrived. So, things keep spiraling from there. So the editing note I put in here was Eddie comes off as way too strong to be believable. I know his character is very like, I want to live no regrets. I want to live life to the fullest, but this is coming on like unbelievably stupidly strong. I didn't like how hard it's hammering that aspect of his character. So my note was, their behavior feels too on the nose for their character flaws. That is too explicit to their problems. We need to dial this back several notches. Now, there's two different ways that could be handled as to how we're going to change things here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of this text and just save it into a Google Doc here so that I have access to that as I change things in a couple different ways. So option number one would be that I'm going to go in here and I'm going to delete the part that says this is an editing note. And I'm going to copy the note I left myself from earlier and just save this. This part here was the actual AI generated summary for this beat. Now I want to go in here and I'm going to modify this beat. I'm going to put my editorial instructions in there. Eddie comes off as too strong to be believable. Behavior feels too on the nose. Dial it back several notches. I'm going to say their insecurities should come out in more subtle ways. Let's see what it makes of this. So now I'm going to click modify. I'm going to just copy that again. Click modify. And so now the AI is going to modify the beat based on my instructions. And we'll see what it comes up with. And once it's done, I'm going to save it and then show you a second way to audit or iterate on beats if you like part of what it's doing, but not necessarily everything. So let's give it a second to think things through. Okay, so it is now rewritten this, and we've got Tessa and Eddie meet at a trendy restaurant. Yep, it kept that bit. It goes wrong almost immediately, but not in any single dramatic way, more like a slow accumulation of small telling missteps. The kind of unconscious fussing a person does when they're nervous and can't sit still. When Tessa arrives, he stands too quickly, knocks the water glass, catches it, then overcorrects into a handshake that's slightly too firm and a half second too long. He's clearly rehearsed something, but what comes out instead is a slightly too eager comment about the restaurant's great energy for a first conversation. Tessa, for her part, clocks all of it. She settles into her seat with a careful composure of somebody who has already begun taking notes and who responds with a warmth that is just a few degrees too measured, the warmth of a professional, not a date. And so you can see some of how it's rephrased and rewritten some of the things based on what we said, but has left other details pretty much intact. The conversation isn't a disaster so much as a series of near misses. Eddie asks good questions but follows up too fast, not quite leaving room for answers to breathe. Tessa's responses are somehow slightly beside the point of what he actually asked, redirecting rather than revealing. So we've got some more details there. It's still sticking pretty close to what it said, just kind of redirecting the thrust of it a little bit so that it's not so on the nose. Like I said, I didn't want it to be on the nose. The ambient mood charms in the restaurant, possibly nudged by Cupid, I almost said COVID, begin to malfunction in small, pointed ways. By the time the entree arrives, the date is a particularly exhausting quality of two people working very hard to seem like they're not working hard. Eddie has let slip without meaning to that he looked up the restaurant's reviews before booking. All of them. Tessa has deployed the phrase, "That's really interesting," 4 times in a way that means something closer to, "I'm processing whether this is a red flag." And again, now if I was keeping this, we can talk about how I would rephrase that. Because again, sometimes it likes to be on the nose with what it writes. And so, it kept the large spirit of what it originally wrote there, but did alter some points of emphasis in alignment with our notes. I'm going to save that, so that's in there here. I'm going to zoom this back out a little bit. So that's option number 1 on how you can change the context of a beat based on feedback. The other option would be I'm going to take the original beat text, which is why I saved this to the side here, and go back into the assistant, and I'm going to create a new chat thread. And let's say this is the original text for the meet cute. I can't talk and type. Okay, this is the original text for the meet cute or meet disaster beat. Let's come up with 10 different ideas for how their date could go wrong. Do not be, no. What happens should not be overly connected to their character flaws. I'm just going to have that as a starting point and copy the beat text in here. Okay, let's come up with 10 different ideas for how the date could go wrong. Yeah, I have the model I wanted. Show me what you've got. It's having that error again. Okay, submit. All right, I might have to make a bug report on this, which I will not do on stream. I'm going to try to do one last time with less text. And if this doesn't work, then we'll just go with the modifying beats route, and I'll show you how I would edit things. Okay, that's the nature of the bug. Okay, so that is a bug. I will report that. Um, but in case anybody is using the AI right now, sees what happens. Instead of creating a new chat thread, what it did instead was add the responses to the chat thread that I already had going on. So here was that first prompt that I put in there. The microphone I am using is one that is built into my webcam. The last time the first stream I did, I had a dedicated table mic, which is good, but it's also a larger mic and you have to be very close to it. So it made things awkward for where I position the mic and my keyboard. And I felt like I was practically swallowing the mic to get through, and the volume was a little bit low. I did a test recording with my webcam's mic, testing volume levels and how well it would pick up audio with me just talking to it. And it actually seemed like the volume came through better. So I decided to try for this stream using the actual webcam's built-in microphone. So hopefully that comes through. Otherwise, if it's not so great on the stream, then I will go back to using the table mic and continue, iterating on that and trying to upgrade the setting with every stream. So my prompts, as I was saying before, my prompts were saved. They went into the existing chat thread versus creating a new one. I will look into this as a bug, but so absolutely, here are 10 ways the date can go wrong at the restaurant, each driven by the magic rich setting. And it says the restaurant's enchanted menus glitch, messing with the menu, mismatched magic wardrobes, overzealous familiar waitstaff, ambient music mishap, spontaneous truth-telling spell. So it looks like it was giving a lot of bad ideas for what could go wrong, but these are external problems. And so then here again, it gave me 10 more ideas because I prompted it again without realizing. So I've actually have 30 different ideas here, 40 different ideas, because I kept resubmitting that prompt. So let's see if now that I have this chat thread up, I'm going to go most of those ideas are external events happening. Please come up with 10 ideas for ways the date goes wrong that are directly related to conversation or personality conflicts between Tessa and Eddie, because that is the more the direction I want the date to be a failure, is that they meet up, they both have baggage, they both bring their baggage into this first date. That creates friction that completely torpedoes everything. That was the direction I wanted to go with it. And the prompt in the Meet Cute beat as is does reflect that, but not quite to the phrasing that has how I would want it. So that is how we're looking for new suggestions on how to phrase things. Okay, so now it's going to give me 10 more ideas, now closer to the direction I wanted it to go. Oversharing. Eddie unloads his entire traumatic relationship history within minutes. That would definitely be a bad idea. They each strive to impress the other with their unusual jobs. it devolves into a one-upsmanship contest. Unsolicited therapy. Tessa reflexively starts psychoanalyzing Eddie after every stray comment, suggesting possible attachment styles and coping mechanisms. Eddie grows frustrated, feeling like he's become a patient rather than a potential partner. I think this one is the most correct to how I see their date imploding from her side. So I'm going to put a mental pin in that one. Value mismatch. A conversation about why they agreed to try Cupid spirals into debate. Eddie wants to maximize every moment and chases intensity. Tessa argues for boundaries and organic connection. Humor misfire. Eddie tries to lighten the mood with a series of morbid consultant jokes about the dead. Tessa's sense of humor is more dry and subtle. Every joke lands flat or is misinterpreted. Red flag spiral. Tessa asks an innocuous question about family or pets, and Eddie's impassioned rambling answer makes her mentally tally up red flags, only she actually blurts out her count. Talking over each other, goal disparity reveal. Defensive mismatches. Whenever Eddie opens up about an insecurity, Tessa responds with an analytical detachment, which makes Eddie close off. And conversely, when Tessa is hesitant or vulnerable, Eddie jumps in with overbearing encouragement that feels like pressure. I think that one would also be Eddie and on character, as long as it's managed correctly. I worry that the AI's initial tendency is going to be to go overboard there, and that I'm going to have to, and that I will, in editing, need to rein it in. But that is our job as the human in the loop, is to take what it gives us as a starting point to help as a springboard, but then impose our will on it and our vision on it. I don't tell anybody that, using Laterpress AI, that it's going to write the book for you. No, it's going to help you write the book. It's going to give you, version 0 to help springboard you and start writing things. But if it's your story, you need to have that creative discernment and judgment about what is it doing right, where do you do better, and then, put yourself in there and do better. Mutual interpretation. Throughout the date, both misread each other's signals. Eddie interprets Tessa's thoughtful silences as disinterest, while Tessa reads his passionate stories as self-absorption. By dessert, both are convinced the other isn't interested and only half-heartedly trying to end the date first in an embarrassing, overlapping exit attempt. Okay, I like that too. So let's say please combine ideas 3, the unsolicited therapy bit, red flag spiral, no, 3, 9, and 10, and write a new summary for what happens in the meet cute beat that sorry, I can't talk and type at the same time. Okay, so I'm going with, now that I have, it gave me a few ideas that I like. Please combine ideas 3, 9, and 10 and write 3 different new summaries for what happens in the meet cute beat that satisfy those ideas. And now I'm specifying 3 different ideas here because I want to, again, get a few different takes on where things could go. If I like one a lot, then I'm going to use that. Or if I think one is closest, I can take it and edit it. if there's bits and pieces of a couple different ideas that I like, then I can cobble those together into a new plot beat that fills out what happens in the meet cute beat. So we're going to ask for that and see what it gives us here. Okay. Variation 1. Eddie tries to set an honest tone by opening up about his fear of wasting time. Tessa, reflexively analytical, nods and begins cataloging his motivation. Eddie, suddenly feeling like a case study, responds defensively. As both stumble into awkward confessions and detached responses, they grow sensitive to imagined slights. Okay, so that's variation 1, the self-help spiral. The meal begins with optimism, but when Eddie expresses nervousness, Tessa instinctively switches into therapy mode, asking measured, open questions, gently correcting his vocabulary and offering grounding techniques right in the middle of dinner. Feeling dissected, Eddie tries to flip the script and support Tessa instead, but she responds evasively, turning his affirmation into a conversation on universalizing one's issues as a defense mechanism. Unable to break through, both start internal monologues about how this is definitely not working. BQ Variation 3, the analytic ping pong. Within minutes of sitting, Tessa and Eddie find themselves caught in a strange conversational loop. Eddie shares a small insecurity, and Tessa responds by suggesting helpful frameworks and labels. When Tessa comments that she's usually overly cautious on dating, Eddie enthusiastically tries to encourage her in a way that feels smothering. Both feel misunderstood. All right, of these three, I think I like option number 1 the best. So I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to get rid of this. And now, again, one thing I could do again from here is modify this beat. Now that we have the original in here that is closer to the way I want things to go, I could say expand on the content of this beat with additional details. And it's kind of a little bit vague. Generally, it helps if you're more specific on what you wanted to focus on, but we'll see what we get here. If I don't like it, I can stick with this version and we can iterate off of that and what happens next. But you can see here that, I'm 48 minutes into a stream and I'm only a few beats deep into the book because I'm not trying to whip through this and just take whatever the AI gives me. I'm looking at it, I'm studying it, I'm thinking about what is it that I like, where do I want to tweak things to be a little bit better, how is it stimulating my thought process on, oh no, here's really what I want the story to be, and we're having a back and forth about it. It's not the AI telling me, what to do. It's not dictating every decision. So now we have a much more, it took that short summary and it's expanded on it a lot. Tessa arrives at the restaurant first. Artemis tucked into a tote bag. I'm going to zoom in on this again so that it's a little more readable. Familiars are technically allowed, but the restaurant's charm-regulated ambience was not designed with opinionated black cats in mind. So it's giving a little more character and flavor in here with what happens, but sometimes that's unnecessary detail that we don't need. So right now I'm just going to review it, but then we'd probably prune it. Eddie walks in. Smiles at the full wattage warmth of the man who's decided this evening is going to go well. It does not go well. Eddie, determined to set an honest tone and skip the small talk performance he's always found hollow, opens with a confession. He works with the dead, which means he's acutely aware of how much time people waste not saying what they mean, and he'd rather just skip to the real stuff. It's genuine. It's also a lot. Tessa, whose entire professional life is built around recognizing when someone is using disclosure as a defense mechanism, reflexively shifts into clinical mode. Okay, yeah, so I think we're on track here. By the time entrees arrive, they've each privately concluded the other is exactly the kind of person they should not be dating. Eddie thinks Tessa is emotionally unavailable and hiding behind jargon. Tessa thinks Eddie is an intensity bomb waiting to go off. They are both in their own ways completely correct and completely wrong. Okay. So yeah, this is much more close to the way I would see this going. So we've got there. Now I would click save here. Okay, I was like, why are they editing notes? Because it did save all of that. I'm just super zoomed in, so I went to the next beat. Now I'm gonna leave this alone for the moment, just because I want to get a little bit further in the plot with the time we have. But as you can see, that there's a lot of notes in here. At the outline level, I don't know that you need this level of detail, and I think on the next stream, it will be kind of an interesting experiment to say, let's generate some scene cards off of this and see what it comes up with this high level of detail. And let's do a version with a lot less detail in the outline and see what it generates there, which gives the better result. Do we want a ton of detail in here or leave more room for the scene cards? But I'm going to leave that there. There's no way we're going to get through all of the plot beats in the time I have left in this stream, and that is completely okay. Next week, the stream is going to be about doing the first chapters. And for the first chapters, we only really need to like the first couple beats. So we're in a good spot for handling next week's stream. Also, this is a very iterative process. You're not married to what any beat says. I personally do not generate, you know, I do tend to like having a complete outline before I start generating chapters, with the outline being exactly how I like it, but that isn't strictly necessary. But you do need to have the specific beat how you like it before you start trying to generate the chapters under that beat. And you do want to make sure the specific chapters from there are how you like it before moving on to a next chapter, because our default prompts when generating text for a story, they look at what was in a prior chapter as context for where things need to go next, as well as looking at the outline and all of the character and lore notes and all of those details. So if you just try to generate chapter after chapter after chapter in a row without reading through or editing the text that came there, you could later discover that it wrote a detail that you disagree with or that feels out of context for how you imagine the scenario going, and that it takes that detail and then expands on it in a future chapter. And now instead of editing one mistake out, you could be editing mistakes out from multiple chapters. So I treat it as a very iterative and methodical process going from beat to beat. So let's do one more beat and then call it a day on the stream. So we're now at early banter and conflict. Okay, I wanted to double back and make sure that this beat establishes that the time loops are starting. They both reach for the check at the same time. They both say, I've got it. They both say, no, really. They both fall into a horrible, polite standoff, blah, blah, blah. Okay. The candle, still slightly smoking, flickers on, and the evening resets. The first loop resets them to a moment just before Eddie's opening monologue, but now both Tessa and Eddie retain their full memory of the disaster. They're bewildered, angry, and for the first time forced to actually talk to each other honestly because pretense seems pointless when you've already watched a candle try to immolate your breadbasket. Eddie drops her script and blurts, okay, so that was terrible, and I also think we're trapped in some kind of magical hostage situation. Tessa, despite herself, laughs. Beneath the bickering, something sparks. They're both quick, both funny, both clearly passionate about their work. When Eddie accidentally mentions a ghost client who reminded him of his grandmother, Tessa's clinical mask slips and she asks a genuinely curious question. So it's given us some details about, their early banter. My editing note after reading that was, this feels too on the nose. They should not immediately understand the nature of what is going on. Live longer in chaos and uncertainty. I want early banter to focus more on their approaches to problem solving and handling confusion. This beat establishes the rules of the game. So I'm going to copy that note that I left for myself, and I'm going to delete it out of here because I don't want that as context for the AI when it's modifying things. And so we're going to go, this beat feels too on the nose. They should not immediately understand the nature of what is going on. Live longer in chaos and uncertainty. They do not realize at first that this is a time loop. I want early banter to focus more on approaches to problem solving and handling, I'm going to say, addressing their confusion. This beat establishes the rules of the game as far as time loops and Cupid's expectations are concerned. Okay, so that is my feedback to modify the beat. We'll give it a minute to do its thing. I need to find some royalty-free elevator music that we can play while we're waiting for AI to generate things. Okay, so now it says instead, the loop resets and neither Tessa nor Eddie has any idea why. One moment they were on the sidewalk that ate mercifully over. Now they're back at the table, menus in hand, the candle unscorched, the breadbasket full. Tessa blinks, Eddie blinks. The server is asking if they like still or sparkling water, exactly as he did before. Tessa looks at Eddie. Eddie looks at Tessa. Neither says anything for a long, strange moment. Then they both start talking at once. Their first instinct is not time loop. Their first instinct is something very wrong, and is almost certainly the other person's fault. Tessa's working theory is that the restaurant's charm-regulated ambiance has malfunctioned, possibly triggered by some kind of emotional resonance event. Here, this is it's getting techno-babbly and jargony. I would find, we're not going to rephrase this on stream at the moment, but I would point this out as something where it's like, okay, I'm going to, even if I agree with that 100%, I'm going to rephrase how it says that. She begins methodically cataloging the sensory details around her to determine what's changed. Eddie's working theory is that a spirit has attached itself to one of them and is replaying a memory, which he has seen before and which is frankly a huge liability on a first date. He starts quietly scanning the room for ectoplasmic signatures. They are each running their own parallel investigation and have not yet thought to compare notes. Artemis is the only one who has arrived at the correct conclusion, watches with the expression of a cat who has been asked to supervise very too confident people assemble furniture without instructions. She says nothing yet. She's waiting to see how long it takes. It takes a while. Eddie midscan notices that the couple in the corner is having the exact same argument they were having before. Same gestures, same pause before the woman laughs. He points this out to Tessa in a low voice. Okay, so we're getting the right idea. I would cull some of this, but we're on track. It's the Artemis puts one paw on the table and says, "It's the app." They both look at her. She looks back. The app, she repeats, with the patience someone who has said the same thing twice and will not be saying it a third time. They look at their phones simultaneously. Cupid's interface is open on both screens, displaying a notification neither of them noticed before. Loop 1 of redacted. Sit tight. This is for your own good. Below it is similar text. Terms and conditions apply. You agreed to these. Scroll to page 47. That's funny and that's on brand. I like that. Neither of them scrolls to page 47. What follows is less a conversation and more simultaneous stress response expressed in two completely different registers. You want to solve it before you understand it. So we've got some dialogue. All right, so I'm going to save this. There is, got myself confused because it went on to the next beat. This is very close. I'm going to zoom this out again because as you can see, it wrote me a lot. And what I would do is in editing this, I would cut down some of the specific dialogue. It doesn't need to be writing that in the outline level. I also want, rather than dry text on a phone, I would be looking at this as more like the app triggers their phone speakers. It starts speaking to them directly because it should be a character with some personality. So I would keep this instead of being like a notification on the screen, as it actually like says these things to them. And we get our first peek as Cupid as a character and an active participant in what is going on here. So I would leave this mostly intact at this point and just delete some unnecessarily extra detail that I think is overly prescriptive. Rephrase things so that Cupid is more active as a character, because I think it is reading Cupid as, because it's the app, it is treating it as an app on a phone. But if I tell it, I don't necessarily want to say it's an AI because I'm not sure how I will write it as an AI. But anyway, so those are some specific tweaks on how I would rephrase this specific beat to move on from here. So over the last hour, I'm gonna wrap up the stream at this point. But over the last hour, now I've shown 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 4 beats of the story. We've reviewed what it gave us, what I liked about how it generated an outline for the story, what I didn't like about it, a couple different ways to edit the outputs and get something closer to what I see as the correct direction for the story. And then that last mile would be to rephrase things in your own style and your own voice if you don't think it is phrasing things quite right. Prune any last details that you think are extraneous or unnecessary. And then once you are satisfied with the beats, then start generating scenes and generating scene text. And so that is what we're going to pick up on with next week's stream, is starting to generate beats and generate scene cards and generating scene text. The thought approach I have would be the same throughout the book from here. So I don't think we need to stream me thinking through the entire book's plotline, but you get the gist. So that will wrap us up for this week. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll continue working on this story next week.